Today I am presenting on specifically child sexual abuse prevention. It will allow us to discuss themes of child abuse prevention in general, strengthening families, and what we can kind of do as a community to help kind of reduce the amount of abuse present and address it. So just as an introduction for those of you who don't know me, my name is Shannon Fox. I'm here with the Bannock Youth Foundation today. I am the CAPE Program Manager, and what CAPE stands for is Communities Aligned in Prevention Efforts. So we'd like to say CAPE because everyone can put on a cape of prevention and be a hero for a child, so that's kind of why we named it that. On your little flyer is kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. Like I said, we're going to have a focus on child sexual abuse prevention. Now, I teach a course called Stewards of Children. This is an evidence-based course. It's from a nonprofit that's internationally known called Darkness to Light. This nonprofit has been operating to provide child sexual abuse education, to help with prevention on a numerous number of levels. It does not only help with child sexual abuse prevention, but they talk about prevention for human trafficking, sexual exploitation of children, how to prevent grooming of children. So they have numerous topics that they cover. Their Stewards of Children training is specifically the 5 steps for child sexual abuse prevention. And if any of you guys have questions about what I'm covering, like I said, I like this to be conversational, so feel free to ask me just while we're talking, or just maybe say, hey, could you provide some clarification on that, whatever works best for you. But when we think of child sexual abuse, it's really important to understand that that is a whole community issue. We're not going to prevent child sexual abuse if we don't work on it from a community level. And it's actually one of the most intense public health crises that we have that's not addressed at a community level. It's kind of difficult to talk about, even saying child sexual abuse prevention. Some people will shy away from it, and that's understandable in the current context of our society and just how things work. But we want to change it. We want to change it to where people are engaged when they think about child sexual abuse prevention. And how we do that is by getting people to come in and interact with the 5 steps that you'll see here on your little flyer. So when we talk about the 5 steps, the first one is all about learning the facts about child sexual abuse, what's really going on, how prevalent it is, what kind of allows it to occur. So one of the statistics that's kind of unknown is that 1 out of 10 children are sexually abused. Now that statistic is pretty concerning. I mean, 1 out of 10 children is like any child being sexually abused is already too much, but 1 out of 10, a lot of people are shocked by that. Now, unfortunately, I do have to say that's a better statistic than where we were a couple years ago. It used to be 1 out of 6 children. So things are improving, but I mean, we still have huge amounts of room to grow in prevention. One of the other uncommon things that people might not understand is you'll see this little graphic on the top left-hand side of the page. It says 90% of victims know their abuser. So 60% of the time it's somebody within the family, 30% of the time it's somebody the family knows and trusts. So when we think about child sexual abuse, it's not normally happening from strangers. 10% of the time it is, so we still need to educate about the danger of strangers, but we really need to focus on who's in our environment, who's interacting with our children, what kind of boundaries do we have within our families and our systems to help protect children. Because the fact that 90% of the time it's somebody that child knows means we know them as well. So it's really important to understand that aspect of it, so that way we can start working on some of the other steps, like learning how to minimize opportunities where child abuse can occur. So if you're thinking about the times right now, COVID, everybody's kind of physically isolated. There's a lot of distance within our systems. So we do have an increased concern about these opportunities for child sexual abuse to be happening, because we can think about how most of the time educators, people out in the community interacting with kids, are the ones that children often tell, that there's something going on. So when we have more situations of children being kind of isolated and with potential perpetrators, there's more opportunity for a child to be harmed. 80% of the time, the sexual abuse occurs in isolated one-on-one situations. So thinking about COVID, how many times are children normally in isolated one-on-one situations with an unfamiliar adult, a peer, even a sibling or family member? But right now we do have to think about how that's maybe happening more often than normal. And with children, these children might be staying with people that they don't know as well either, because the current circumstances, families are, struggling to just get enough childcare to, make work happen, to provide the education that children need in the setting for that. So children might be staying with family members, friends, receiving childcare from non-childcare professionals. So there's actually more opportunity right now for children to be sexually abused, but we have to think in general, there's always been a lot of opportunity because we might not be creating a lot of boundaries that minimize the risk. So we have to think about right now, especially what we can do to minimize opportunity. And there's a lot of things where it's mostly conversation, boundaries we set up with one another, our conversation with kiddos, making sure that they understand things, which kind of brings us to 3, talk openly about abuse and how to prevent it. So if we want child sexual abuse to be prevented, we have to have conversations with our kids that are very frank and very open and very honest. We have to teach children about their body parts in the correct terms for them. One of the really difficult things that is part of our training, just to help people kind of get an understanding of the language that children will use if they don't have proper terminology, is one time there was a child sitting in their kindergarten class for story time, and that child turned to their teacher and said, "My daddy ate my cookie last night." And that is something that's pulled from our training. So that's something that happened. And what the child was trying to disclose was that sexual abuse had occurred from her dad. The teacher didn't have any language to discern what that meant, and so that child did not receive services, as quickly as they could have if they had the right terminology for their body. So we have to talk to our children very openly, in respect to age. Age appropriate is always, something we have to consider as well. And we do have guidance on that. So when you go through our training, you learn about what that's like, how to have those age appropriate conversations. But we have to talk with the child, and as they get older, we want to talk with them about what's okay and what's not okay. A lot of us think about, no touch zones. A lot of us are taught about no touch zones, being any area that a swimsuit will cover, but we actually have to even go further than that any type of uncomfortable touch is not something a child should feel like they have to hide, or, they should feel open to talking to their parent about it. Because a lot of grooming behaviors, so when a perpetrator is trying to create a relationship with a child so they can eventually sexually abuse them, it'll be a hand on the shoulder, a back rub, touch on the leg. And if your child only knows to come to you when it's a no zone that gets touched, there might be some really big missed opportunities to intervene and talk about boundaries. So we really have to be open with our children, which can be pretty difficult. If it's uncomfortable for us to talk about it, it's going to be uncomfortable for the kids to talk about it too. So we have to kind of let our own feelings about it kind of drop to the side and just really have some open conversations. But then we have to learn how to be pretty frank with other adults. I will say there have been situations that I have been in where I'm setting boundaries with other adults and they're not comfortable with it. They kind of give me a side eye and they're like, "Okay, why are you talking to me about this? That's my business or that's your business?" And I'm like, "No, it's everyone's business because we need to have proper boundaries. So if you come over to my house, we're not going to have, alone time with children in this setting. We're going to have everything be out in the open." And then I think too, I have a younger sister. When she has sleepovers, there's going to be, pretty frank conversation about that she knows how to have boundaries. And if anybody crosses her boundaries, she's allowed to come talk to me. So she has that education. And so that other adult or family she's interacting with knows that she's been informed and that I will be there for her. It's definitely not on the child to protect themselves from child sexual abuse, but we have to give children the language so that they can have a level of protection for themselves and have those skills. But it's definitely our role and our responsibility to set those boundaries and create that safety. So When we think about child sexual abuse, we know that we might be interacting with a lot of kiddos that have already experienced that. And so we have to learn how to recognize the signs and symptoms of child sexual abuse. And this is something that's pretty difficult to maybe understand if you don't have any interaction with what to look for. So that's why we want to give people the ideas of what to look for. For each child, it's going to look different. Their behaviors in reaction to abuse and the trauma that they've experienced is going to be different. Younger kids are not going to have as much that they can say verbally. They might try to verbalize something, but then again, if they don't have the proper terms, that's going to be really difficult. So they might be, acting weird around somebody they know. They might not want to go home with somebody or interact with that person or give them a hug. We have to let them know that that's okay. Like if a child doesn't want to hug somebody, we have to, like I said, talk to them about how they can have their own boundaries. But if we're seeing those signs, we need to be concerned and maybe start asking some questions. Some other things that you might see are psychosomatic representations of their trauma. So when our bodies experience something and our brains can't make sense of it and we can't verbalize it, we have psychosomatic effects, stomach aches, headaches, nightmares. In younger children, you might see bedwetting, inappropriate interaction with themselves, things like that. So we have to be aware that if we're seeing any of those signs, sometimes it's normal, sometimes it's not. And if we are seeing those, we need to be asking the questions to determine if it is or isn't. As kids get older, though, that what they're expressing is going to change. So as a child gets close to the teen years, they might be more agitated, more frustrated, might not be able to pay attention in school that well because their bodies experience trauma and they're stuck kind of in this trauma response mode. They might have kind of extreme reactions towards the people that they feel could harm them. You might also see poor school attendance, performance, because there is that impact on their ability to process and think about things critically and develop that part of their brain. And then as kids get older, you might start seeing things like negative coping mechanisms, acting out, being violent, using substances, self-harm, sexual interaction with other children that's maybe not appropriate. We do have to understand that normally when somebody experiences child abuse, especially child sexual abuse, they're not going to necessarily become perpetrators, but when they're younger, they might act that out with another child, just because that's their experience and that's what they're going to maybe act out. Now, it is rare for a child sexual abuse victim to then go on to abuse other children. It's not like other types of abuse. It's different because the harm that sexual abuse causes, they do not necessarily then perpetrate on others. So when we also think about symptoms, we have to think about the fact that people are going to react differently in ways that we still may never really have thought of, like overperformance in school, doing really, really well at something. In our training, there's actually, I think she was a gym or an Olympian for swimming, Margaret Holzer. She won, Olympic medals for swimming. She did really well in school. She was doing well across the board, and people never really asked her if she was experiencing anything difficult, and she was. She had been sexually abused for many years. And so sometimes we have to just think about, even if we're seeing something that doesn't look like it could be a sign or symptom, we still have to ask some questions. So if you see a behavior or you just have a gut feeling that something's not going well for a child, or you just want to know a little bit more about their motivation for what they're doing, just ask. Be like, hey, what's your motivation for this? Or hey, why is this your reaction to this? And just kind of create that conversation. Now, there's a lot more to that we normally cover in our training. The Stewards of Children training is about 2 hours, so I'm very rapidly trying to get through these 5 steps. The last one we're going to talk about is learning about reporting and reacting responsibly. So everybody in Idaho is a mandated reporter. It's actually a misdemeanor if you suspect, witness, or hear disclosure, and then you do not report it to health and welfare. So why is it a misdemeanor? Because it's so important for a report to be made that there's legal consequences if you know something's going on and you don't report it. That can be pretty difficult though if you don't understand what to look for, what signs to look for, or if you don't know what a disclosure is, or if you don't really understand how to make a report. So we educate people on how to make reports. Really, if you have suspicion, that just means maybe you've witnessed something that's pretty concerning. That means that you've maybe just got a gut feeling from what a child has said to you that may still be kind of vague, but you're getting this gut feeling that something's not right. You can make a report on that. You do not have to have any sort of proof that a child's experienced sexual abuse. You can have that reasonable suspicion and make a report, because the more people that do that might make it to where they understand that they need to open a case and really investigate what's going on. Only about 4 to 8% of child sexual abuse reports are fabricated. So it's very rare for a report from a child to be, fake. And if there is a report that is found to be fabricated, normally there's something else going on for that to have occurred, but that's a whole nother conversation. So just sticking back to talking about, so we discussed suspicion, if you have reasonable suspicion. If you witness something, obviously that's something you need to report. If you interrupt a child being abused, you need to make a report. Even if it's something that, like I said, the suspicion can kind of be difficult, but if you see inappropriate touching, very obvious boundary violations, if you see any images or videos or pictures, any of that stuff, you're witnessing potential abuse or you're witnessing abuse, so you need to report that. Now, disclosure is when a child comes to you and tells you that they've been sexually abused. I've actually interacted with disclosure from children before. I was interacting with a 4-year-old, and she was just sitting and coloring with me, and all of a sudden she started talking about a sexual abuse experience that she had. And I have training on how to handle disclosures. We discussed that in our Stewards of Children training. But when she started to talk to me, I just had to come to this place of calm. It was difficult because I did have a connection with that child. So once she started saying things, I was already kind of emotional. Even though I have all this training, it still has an emotional reaction. So you just have to find kind of a place of quiet so the child can say whatever they need to, especially as they get older. If you show an emotional reaction, being upset, being angry, they might pull back from what they're telling you because children are super sensitive to what the person they're interacting with responds to them with. So we really have to come to kind of this place of calm. We need to give them all the space and time that they need. We do not want to ask closed-ended questions. If we're going to ask for any more information, it can be like, what was going on? Or can you tell me more about that? And if they want to say something, they will. And if they don't want to say something, they won't. Sometimes they'll need a couple of minutes to process. I will say with that 4-year-old girl, it took about 30 minutes for her to say everything she needed to. And as soon as she was done, she just stopped talking about it and was continuously coloring. I wanted to have more information. I wanted to know a little bit more. Just that was my kind of just human reaction. I wanted to understand, but I knew once she was done talking, that was it. I needed to take all of that information and make a report. So when you're hearing a disclosure, you just want to remember, stay as calm as possible. Thank the child. You want to thank them and tell them it was okay that they reported or told you things, because they need to be reassured, because normally the individuals that perpetrate abuse tell them, don't tell anyone, it's our secret, you'll get in trouble, I'll get in trouble. So there's a lot of guilt around that, and she actually did say that the individual who abused her told her not to tell anyone. So I had to really kind of highlight, no, this was a good thing. Thank you for telling me. You don't want to make any promises about how things are going to look after they tell you. So I didn't say like, okay, well, make sure that never happens again. I mean, of course, that's what you want, but you don't want to make any promises. You want to make sure they're not going to be around that perpetrator until some kind of service can be provided. But you also want to, like I said, don't ask any closed-ended questions. Keep that reaction minimal. Give them the space and time that they need to process what they're trying to tell you. All right, so I don't know if I went over 15 minutes or not.
So I'm seeing the take a free online Stewards of Children, so they can take that online.
Yeah. So I have on the bottom here, that whole thing that I just went through is expounded upon and provided in an online and in-person format. The online training can be accessed through this little code at the bottom. It's called Flip the Switch campaign. And this campaign was actually put together by the Olympian Allie Raisman. I hope I'm saying that right. So she had a child sexual abuse experience, and she partnered with Darkness to Light to provide the online training for free. So it's currently available for free. We also have a session that we're providing at ISU through the Continuing Education and Workforce Training Program. That's this little flyer on the other side, so you have a two-sided flyer. So on November 10th, we're providing the Stewards of Children training in person. I will say that the in-person training is a great way to process with other people because we have the video sessions that are done through a MSW, so a Master's in Social Work, pulled together this evidence-based information with Darkness to Light, and it's a video training. But then we have a workbook where we engage in different 10 to 15-minute sections where we take the material and we start to apply it to our lives. We ask questions and we engage. So when you can do that in person, it's a little bit better than just sitting alone at home with a computer. But I would say anybody should take the training, and if the online format is the best way for you to do that, and then contact us if you have any questions. And then we also provide these trainings for any organization or group that's interested in person as well. So if you have a group of people that would like to take it, we do have grant funds to help cover the cost of the workbooks. And so you just have to contact us and we'll set up a personalized training for whatever group is interested. I myself have trained about 1,000 people in the Stewards of Children training program. So I have a lot of experience training people. It's something that I love to be able to provide the education, so anybody that can, that wants to come and learn a little bit more, I'd love to do that for them.
And tell us how the Hope Conquers ACEs, the resilience fits in with all of this.
Yeah, so you kind of heard me going a little bit off topic a couple times, saying that I could talk about some other things in depth for another topic, and that's because we provide actually 50 hours worth of training on things like abuse, trauma, prevention, ACEs, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, resilience, strengthening families, and brain development. So on the other side of the flyer here, we do have not only the Stewards of Children class being provided, but with ISU, we've partnered with the Continuing Education Workforce Training Program to provide some of our other classes that help kind of do a deep dive on other issues related to abuse and how that impacts the brain and development, how to grow resilience in response to abuse experiences, how to grow resilience just in general, how to strengthen families, all that. So we definitely have a lot of different training programs that we provide that we really love anybody to access.